This city of New York has been transformed under the Bloomberg administration into a developer's paradise. Manhattan has been turned into one of the most affluent, gated communities in the world. Not by putting gates around it, but by simply raising the rents and the property prices to the point where it's very, very hard for ordinary people to live here. You have in effect a financial Katrina, which is hitting low-income neighborhoods, African-American neighborhoods, hitting particularly badly on single-headed household women in particular. What we should do is to take that money into those neighborhoods and ask municipalities, step by step, to revitalize those neighborhoods, take care of the foreclosures, and actually revitalize the urban infrastructure. We have a lot of struggles with urban infrastructures right now. Now, at this particular moment, it's really very interesting because the other aspect of the other tsunami that's coming, if you want to call it that, is that municipalities are beginning themselves to experience a fiscal crisis because property taxes are falling, their finances are falling, so actually municipalities are beginning to cut back, even in this city, which has been less hit up until this point. And cities like Cleveland and Detroit are laying off people, reducing services. And this is exactly what happened in the 70s. That is, you use your power to go after those people who are least privileged, have the least possibility, in order to preserve the class power of the very affluent. And that is roughly where this bailout is headed right now.
This bailout is bullshit! 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 This bailout is bullshit!
And it's one of those ironies that I find myself in alliance with the right wing of the Republican Party in saying this bailout should not go through. Not in this form. There is another way to do it.
Handout for Wall Street. Handouts to Wall Street. We can't live the way we used to do. I have to give up my maid. Handout to Wall Street.
Now that then raises the other question. If we're going to think about this as an urban crisis, then are there ways in which we can start to think about the urban as a site of revolutionary movement?
You broke it! You bought it! You broke it! You bought it! You broke it! You bought it!
Now 40 years ago, a book came out called The Right to the City by Henri Lefebvre. There are many people now who are rereading that book because also what happened in 1968 was also very much an urban movement. It was about the neighborhoods in Paris. It was about the quality of life in urban regions. And by thinking about the right to the city, you can start to say, we should be able to take back the right to the city. And this right to the city is not an individual right of access to the city. It's a collective right to change the city in a radically different way from what it is. The fear that we're constantly faced with, the fear of terrorism, now the fear of financial collapse, The politics of fear is really being used big time, and we have to find a politics of hope to go against it. And that politics of hope, I would suggest, could well be articulated around this idea of the right to the city. In other words, this seems to me an appropriate moment both to reinterpret this fiscal crisis which we're going through as an urban crisis, and then to confront it with an alternative approach to the urban issues through the theme of the right to the city. So the right to the city then is a right to transform it. And on that there's a wonderful statement by an urban sociologist in Chicago who said this, that the city is in effect the place where we have really tried to make the world more after our own heart's desire. But in making the city, we have created an environment in which we're henceforth condemned to live. So, in a sense, without even being really conscious of what we're doing, in remaking the city, we have remade ourselves. So the right to the city is about remaking us, remaking social relations, remaking environmental relations, remaking political structures, remaking the physical fabric, and in so doing, remaking ourselves. So one of the big questions, which actually I see being asked in different ways, particularly in the arts communities, is to ask the question, not simply about what kind of city do we want to live in the future, but what kind of people do we want to be? And by thinking of that as a dialectical relation, what you then start to think of is an unfolding of politics. An unfolding of politics that takes us in a radically different direction.
This is the most outrageous swindle in the modern history of this country, and I think the American people are sick and tired of the people in Washington giving our money first $700 billion to war that we don't want, and now $700 billion to rich people on Wall Street. We say no way.
No way.
We also say that those very people who are going around the world saying free market, free market, free market, when it comes to the losses, what do they say? Government bail us out. They want to privatize profits and socialize losses. And we say, no way! And now we have in Washington another spectacle. The Bush administration, who is orchestrating this, along with the leadership of the Democratic Party. And what are they doing? They're trying to throw in a few crumbs here and there so that it looks good. A citizen commission to oversee the bailout? We say, no way! A couple of crumbs for people who are losing their homes? We don't want crumbs. We want the whole pie. And we want it to go for people losing their homes. We wanted to go for a healthcare system so we can have healthcare like people around the world have it. We wanted to go to our education system so our kids can have good schools. So we're here to say no crumbs. We're here to say no privatizing profits and socializing of the losses. We're here to say to the bailout, no way! No bailout! No bailout!
Brothers and sisters, I want to first say that I'm here on behalf of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union Local 10 in San Francisco. On May 1st, 2008, the ILWU shut down the entire port on the West Coast on May Day to oppose the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. We see this action on the part of Paulson and Bernanke as being the surge at the war at home. This is the war at home. Why do I say that? Because while there's been a war abroad in Iraq and Afghanistan, the war at home has been a war on working people, a war on the future of our children. And here now, this surge that calls for $700 billion, not including the billions that have gone for AIG, Freddie Mac, and the other. We are witnessing not only an attack on our future, this is an attack on our democracy. This is awarding casino capitalism. And the barons of bailouts, Bernanke, and the treasurer, Mr. Henri Paulson. Remember, Henri Paulson served in the Nixon administration. He was an assistant to John Ehrlichman. It was there that he went to Goldman Sachs. This is a man who was the chief architect of deregulation and casino capitalism. And now the American people are asked to turn over our resources to him? No. That's the fox guarding the hen house. It is so important that the rank and file, I don't care if you are Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever you call yourself, people are upset at this. This is the second event that I've attended here on Wall Street today. And I submit to you that we as working people will have the last say in this. Because no matter what they do in Washington, ultimately they have to face the people. And we have power, brothers and sisters. If we can shut down the port on the West Coast to oppose the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, what would happen in this country if we decided not to go to work to protest this? This is something that is very dear to all of us. We cannot remain silent on this. And ultimately, this will be a test as to whether or not we are going to allow our democracy to be sold away without saying anything, without even dropping our work tools, leaving our pens at the office and stopping work for one day to protest this action.
I'm here as a citizen, as we all are, and I am tired. I am tired of my tax dollars going elsewhere. I'm tired of my tax dollars going to pay for the war in Iraq. I'm tired of this administration and government and its control. It was just yesterday that our energy segment said we don't have to talk about what we're doing or who's at the meeting, but we paid billions for gas while there are record profits. And now here we're on Wall Street talking about bailing out corporations who should stand alone in terms of their decisions and not us taxpayers shelling out $2,300 a piece on the average while people walk out of here with $30 billion in bonuses. This has to end. America, wake up. America, get a hold of your Congress people and say no bailout. No government control. No system. Just like Homeland Security that says we have no review. We have no need to know. And that those in power can make those decisions. Let's change this. Let's start right now. No bailout. Let's change what's happening. Taxpayers, stand up. Peace. Peace.
Now it so happens that some of us academics have been thinking about right to the city as a motif for our work. But at the same time, there are social movements around. There is a national social movement called Right to the City. There is a Right to the City movement here in New York, a coalition of different groups, because different groups against gentrification or in defense of public housing or in favor of democratizing spaces in the city. These different movements are all beginning to recognize that you just cannot get very far on a single narrow objective. We need a collective movement. And that collective movement can be pulled together around this theme of the right to the city. And this was something that Henri Lefebvre pointed out back in 1968. He basically said, the theory of revolution has to be urban-based or it will be nothing. If we cannot transform our cities, we will not be able to transform the social order and vice versa. And it is that connectivity that it seems to me we should all be thinking about on a grander scale. It is a long-term task which we have to think about in terms of what our future cities are going to be like and how that future is going to be about the kinds of people we are. What I find very interesting, particularly in situations of this kind, is that many people are trying to identify entirely different sets of social relations and insert themselves in various ways into the urban around those social relations, or those different definitions of social relations, or environmental relations. In other words, there is a sense, a struggle going on which is a bit subterranean. What is lacking right now is the articulation of all of that ferment which is going on in these different places and different times. I mean, I meet groups all over the place who are doing fantastic kinds of things. The problem is to somehow or other articulate it, bring it together so it becomes a much more of a mass social movement of the sort that did indeed change things, for instance in this country, like the civil rights movement of the 60s did, to try to push on a more collective kind of way towards a different macro politics. Because right now we have one political party called the Republicrats. It's actually operating more and more on the Chinese model of a single state apparatus with different internal factions fighting each other, sort of governing over a crazy capitalism which is constantly supporting. I thought it very interesting during the Democratic primaries that the more the primaries went on and the more the candidates were forced to deal with the conditions of the people, the more their rhetoric at least moved a little bit to the left. The problem is it almost certainly won't stay there unless we have social movements that can keep it there. One of the big problems in this, again, has been the individualization. This comes back to the, it's a very interesting phenomena. What did suburbanization do to political attitudes? People started to think about, just their space, the value of their home, keep other people out, not in my backyard. Very conservative politics. The urban was creating a new kind of suburban political subjectivity. And in the same way, the transformation of urban life over the last 30 or 40 years into niche markets and all the rest of it, and individualistic, do-it-yourself kind of situation, means that, in a sense, the collective notion of a city, the collective notion of a body politic that can actually collectively do something, is very hard to reconstruct. That is the task that we have to think about. Where does New York City begin and where does it end? There are people working in New York City who live in New Hampshire. There's a lot of second homes, and the kind of integration of the urban and the rural is very, very important to look at. And I think that what Lefebvre was talking about when he was talking about eventually, this is the reason he switched his language from the city to the idea of the right to produce space in general. And it is therefore the production of space and spatiality. But I think the right to the city encompasses very much that aspect of politics as well. And I think, for example, this subprime crisis, the way it's set out is, well, there were some evil people around who did evil things. And, oh yes, we're going to send the FBI in now and arrest a few people and send them to jails, just so, you know, everybody in the population feels better about the situation. It's not a problem of evil folk doing evil things. It's a systemic problem of the nature of capitalist development. I mentioned the fact that capitalism is always producing surpluses. At the end of the day, we have to control the surpluses, not them. Just think how nice it would be from them. They wouldn't have all this anxiety about what to do with their surplus the day after, because we just take it away from them, so they could sleep well at night. And in fact, there have been some very interesting plans and ways to do that. And of course, during the 1950s and 1960s, a significant chunk of the surplus was being taken away by the state and being used to support education and healthcare and all those kinds of things, well, and all the rest of it. Wasn't the best system in the world, lots of criticisms to be made of it. But at the end of the day, until we control the surplus, we're not going to be able to get to the heart of this particular problem. Otherwise, we're going to be faced with this issue I mentioned at the very beginning, which is a compound rate of growth for the next 300 years. What would that look like? As it is, growth is stymied, real growth is stymied, and so we get fictitious growth of this sort that we've seen in this financial catastrophe. And now, of course, there's an attempt to take it out on us. And that also has to be understood. So these are the questions, if you like, that seems to me to have to be put up on the agenda. And I feel as frustrated as you do in the sense that, you know, how do we get these ideas out there? How do we get them moving?
All right, we're in line for the Anarchy ice cream truck. What are you gonna try, Steve? They have anarchy, green cleaning, Black Panthers, guerrilla composting, revolutionary consensus, graffiti liberation, Earth First, protest tips, free Mumia. Hi, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
What are you guys selling here today?
We're actually selling nothing here today. Nothing is for sale here.
So it's free ice cream.
Free ice cream, free propaganda.
I'm gonna try the revolutionary consensus.
Okay, revolutionary consensus coming up, and what flavor of ice cream would you like with that?
I guess cherry pop.
There's your cherry pop, and there's your revolutionary consensus.
So where are you based out of?
Well, this project actually started out in Kansas City, and then did a tour of the Midwest before moving out to the West Coast, and there it traveled from Tijuana to Vancouver before settling back down in the Bay Area for a little bit, and now out to New York for the first time. Came in through Creative Time as part of Democracy in America, and had an opportunity to do a couple of events out in Brooklyn, out in Flushing, Queens, and over at Exit Art one evening.
Have you had like a lot of positive response? Are people confused when they come up to the ice cream trucks?
You know, I think the ice cream truck here combines a lot of familiar elements in a kind of unfamiliar way. So people latch onto the familiar, and the unfamiliar bits kind of open them up a little bit to exploring new ways of understanding information and their stomachs as well. So for the most part, the responses have been extremely positive. Any bit of confusion kind of disappears once people have a bomb pop in their hands and a little bit of anarchism to read about. And I would say that takes care of it.
Great. And what's the organization called?
The Center for Tactical Magic.
Ah, the Center for Tactical Magic. Excellent. And where can we find you on the web?
On the web, it's tacticalmagic.org.
Anarchy with some fudge. Fudge you. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, fudge you.
Thank you.
There you are.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
Atlantic Yards is a deal that is done. It's to be made of glass and steel, but it's really built from dung. It's a dung deal, D-U-N-G, it's a dung deal.
Attorney General Mukasey, you are now sworn in. Mukasey? Can you hear me, Mukasey?
Slap him around a couple of times like he... Can you tell me now, are we torturing you?
Bush versus Brooklyn. Brooklyn versus Bush. Bush versus Brooklyn.
We are the champions, my friend.
Watch Brooklyn vs. Bush Monday night, 11:30 Brooklyn time, midnight Manhattan time. Always online at brooklynversusbush.com.
What nation are we invading? Iraq? Iran? Iraq?
Our freedoms and our rights are slowly being eroded by executive orders and by signing statements.
Do you think the government should be able to just march in for a developer and kick you out? You should think that if it can happen here, it can happen to anyone, anywhere.
This devolution of the American press began in 1988 when Ronald Reagan abolished the Fairness Doctrine.
I don't understand why we can't have a little piece of history when everybody else has so much.
No more stolen, fraudulent elections.
This is Freddie's Brooklyn Roundhouse with Cynthia McKenney.
As my fellow Brooklynite, Allen Ginsberg said, the soul should never die ungodly in an armed madhouse.
Freddie's Brooklyn Roundhouse. Watch the show the corporate media doesn't want you to see. Tuesdays at 8 in Brooklyn, Thursdays at 8:30 in Manhattan, and online all the time at Freddy'sBrooklynRoundhouse.org and YouTube.com/Atlantic Yards.